Hello and welcome to this Future of Education panel discussion entitled Aligning Academia with Industry Needs. I am Godfrey Mutizwa. We host this panel in the afterglow of the creation of Wall Street's latest trillion-dollar company within a few weeks and for a few minutes anyway, in May. And so the question we're asking today is, can education keep up? It's a crucial question because suitably qualified and skilled employees are a key requirement in today's economy. Helping me to answer that question is Professor Gary Martin, CEO at Australia Institute of Management, Western Australia. Professor Mark Smith, President and Vice Chancellor at the University of Southampton. Azmat Tafik, Founder and Managing Partner at Blue Monsoon Capital. And joining me in the studio is Sugendri Reddy, CEO of Access Bank. I want to begin with the classroom examination of the connection between education and the workplace. Professor Martin, I'm going to start with you. I want to ask the question if we have been able to keep education connected to capital in the correct way, or like the example I've just mentioned, we are being left behind.
Well, I think the direct answer is that it's very difficult for universities to actually keep up to date with industry trends because of some of the processes that take place in universities in terms of approval of courses and so on. That is at least the case in Australia, where the lag time between what industry demands at a particular time and the course development is sometimes up to 2 years. So by the time some of the changes to courses are made to meet industry demands, there's a problem because in fact, there's a new set of demands that are on the doorsteps of universities. So I think it's a juggling act, and I think that while universities in Australia try to keep up with what's happening in workplaces, there is a bit of a lag due to academic approval processes in universities.
Yeah, is that a desirable lag, or is it one that we need to work at?
Well, I think we need to work at it. We need to fast track changes. Say, for example, right now everybody's talking about artificial intelligence and how it's going to impact, everything from your planning a diet to what you study in universities to how it's used in universities. These sorts of things take a long time to build into the curriculum in universities, in my experience. But we do need to look at ways of actually fast tracking it so that we can be relevant really up to the minute now.
Yeah. And I was asking the question deliberately because I thought perhaps you need time to think deeply into these things. But then again, that's part of the discussion we're going to be having as well. Professor Smith, if I can come to you, it's the same question really. I got a concession there. Do I get the same concession with you in terms of that lag?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two or three arguments here in the sense of there's a lot of, if you're making a change to a curriculum, you need to make sure that that change, all the quality assurance and the thinking goes around that. So you always have to balance off timescales. And I think, making sure that you do things in a timely way, because sometimes, things in industry, some ideas flip in and out very quickly, and they're shown not to be the right way of thinking about things. So you have to be very careful that you're teaching students the right things. The other thing I'd say is that you've got to, I think, distinguish content from broader skills. And most broader skills are kind of, they're time independent, your ability to communicate, your ability to work in a team, all of those types of things, the understanding of, different perspectives, which, education brings you. They're kind of time immemorial things, really. And, the curriculum certainly has those. I think trends you're seeing in the UK, you're seeing, we've seen for a long time, most degrees would have advisory bodies whereby industry is involved in that because you want to make sure your curriculum is relevant. But also, you're seeing more, particularly in later years, bringing people from industry in, an industry widely construed, from policy makers as well, to actually be able to talk about how they're seeing it. So they actually form part of the delivery of the curriculum. And through that, I think those elements of the curriculum do stay up to date pretty well. So I think it's a balance. I think it's a mixture, and I think that before it becomes a core part of the taught curriculum, you have to make sure that it's really well founded and it is quality control. But I think most of our curricula, although I agree with what Gary said, university processes can sometimes be a bit slow.
Yeah.
I think that slowness actually is actually one of the filters that make sure you get the thinking correct, basically.
Yeah, I actually wanted to emphasize that point to make the point also that we know that in the markets and in the real economy, companies come sometimes with what appear like revolutionary ideas, and in the end, sometimes those things do not work out. I mean, we can give many examples. Where is this very rich man, Mark Zuckerberg, and his metaverse?
Sorry, can you say the last bit again?
No, I was just making the point that we do need that leg, and because in the markets, people, the things do happen and things do fail. And I was giving the example of Mark Zuckerberg and his metaverse, $36 billion later.
Absolutely. And I mean, there are examples in the past as well. If you think about technologies, there's been technologies that have been developed, and they're supposed to be the next great advance. They just can't be implemented, for practical. The ideas were good, and it would have been a mistake actually to teach them in a well-founded curriculum. So you have to be very careful about very rapid changes before they're well thought through.
Yeah, and I'm making the point in part to provoke Sugendri, because before we came into the studio, we were having a discussion, and one of the points she made to me was that there's very clearly a misalignment sometimes between academia and the real workplace. So you have listened to this to two professors, and they talk about the fact that you have to have a balance, a concession that there is a leg, but also an acknowledgement that part of that leg is an important leg in terms of learning. What do you say to that?
So I hear them, but I disagree, because business is moving at a very rapid pace. And we in business are saying, agile thinking, do things, fail fast, move on. But academia says, I need time, I need to test theories. And by the time that comes through, it's too long. And we have moved on to something else. And the relevance of the qualification becomes questionable. And so also like basic skills, the professor said, yes, but teaching people to communicate and everything is standard skills, it will last forever. But even communication has changed. How do you communicate to people and teach people to work in a global world? You're a global citizen. How do you teach people how to enhance culture in a virtual world? So the way business has evolved is totally different from what we have learned previously, even with our basic communication skills. How do we impart our knowledge and teach new employees about new concepts or how the business works in a virtual world? It is very difficult. Nobody's teaching us these things in universities, but yet COVID has changed the world.
True.
And that COVID is now 3 years on, and we haven't moved on to start changing curriculums to be relevant on basic things.
Yeah, so I want you to reach out to the two professors to connect them to the real workplace and to connect, to reach into their classroom as well. How do we go about ensuring that we still are able to get, I'm going to call it a product that's at least ready to be able to make a difference in the workplace, while at the same time recognizing the systems and processes that they have to go through to make sure that rigorous thought has gone into the curriculum to develop people who are adaptable?
So I think the first thing is business and academia needs to come closer together in developing the curriculum.
Right.
And this is not a once-off thing. This is like a regular thing to understand how business is evolving. And that is missing where, the academics go and research, and it's desktop research, and you do multiple forms of research. But I think we need to, when it comes to actually understanding what business requires, you have to be with business. And you have to talk to business leaders to understand that. So we see academics, graduates coming out, they memorize things rather than actually understanding the practicality. They're not able to connect the whole dots because everybody learns things in silos in one particular category. But no matter what category you choose, you have to have a way of teaching people how do you connect the whole picture. So because business is a puzzle, we're building a puzzle every day. And everybody puts a piece of the puzzle, but we're not connecting that dots, not connecting that puzzle. So that's the first thing. Secondly is the relevance. How do you teach people to actually be critical thinkers, creative thinkers? We teach people to be employees, to just know this theory and be employees. The future world needs more entrepreneurs rather than pharmacists or things that robots are going to take over. So even the curriculum and what we push students towards needs to be rethought. We need to think about what we actually need.
Yeah.
I mean, I think when we talk about AI as well,
Yeah.
that becomes very important.
Yeah.
So to give you an example, when I went to university a long time ago,
Yeah.
if anybody did a Bachelor of Arts, they called it a Bachelor of Bugger All. What do you do with that? But Bachelor of Arts has something like psychology. Today, having that basic subject of psychology is so important for business because as you're moving to a robotic world,
Yeah.
robots need to understand humans
Yeah.
because humans
Yeah.
deal with humans.
Yeah.
So how do you build that processes into robots? So there's a lot that we need to rethink from an academic point of view.
Yeah, professors, I'm going to give you an opportunity to respond to Sugendri, but I've got a few points myself that I'd like to make, but before I go there, I'm going to be democratic and allow you to reply. Should we start with Professor Martin? We come to Professor Smith?
Sure, I'm happy to respond. I think a lot of what's been said is really important. Engaging business with universities is extremely important. And we've been talking about that for the last 20, 30, 40 years in Australia, how it's really important to engage business with universities to develop the curriculum. However, it's easy to say that, but in terms of people being pushed for time in the business community, trying to get people in at the granular level is quite a challenge, I have to say, here in Australia, because business, like academics, are very challenged when it comes to their time. The second thing that I think in Australia that universities have been doing for a long time have been addressing those skills or attributes, I'd really call them, that employers need. And that's been happening for as long as I can remember. It's not that you suddenly do a course that's focused on emotional intelligence. Courses are structured to address, or course content structured to address those particular skills. So in Australia for a long time, we've been focused on things like emotional intelligence, adaptability, trust, in the workplace, cultural capabilities, self-care, being digitally savvy, communication. All of those things have been addressed systematically, but the expectation is that in some business communities is that when people arrive, you should do nothing with your graduates. The graduates are ready to go and they should be totally work ready. And of course, we know if we look at our own careers, it takes many, many years to build those capabilities. Universities can go so far before business has to take some of those things on. And to be perfectly honest, I think the answer is not through having advisory committees or involving business directly with academics around committees and so on to get curricula developed. They're nice to have, but I actually think it's more about getting potential employees into businesses right from the beginning through internships that go longer term. So you start off with, in the first year of a degree, a period of time in a workplace, you go back to that workplace for a longer time, and you gradually come to grips with what's required in the workplace that way. It's all well and good to say universities have to do this and business has to do that, but it's about the graduate. The graduate or the student is at the heart of that experience, and we need to involve them more.
It's clearly complicated more than it is a simple way of simply saying, let's get this person to come in. Professor Smith, Sugendri wants to come into your classroom, but he doesn't want to come in as a student. She wants to contribute to the product that you're trying to produce.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there was a lot of points made there. And I think one of the points that Gary's just made is one of the key things that I've seen change in higher education in the last 20 years, which is the number of internships. And as a recognized part of the degree, the student actually coming in, doing part of their work within the workplace. And I think more of that's going to happen for a whole range of reasons. And in North America, there's some very good examples of what they call cooperative degrees, where students can actually team and ladle the amount of time they spend in industry and the amount of time they spend within the academic institution. And I think more and more of that's going to happen for a whole range of reasons, some of which Gary alluded to. You can put your learning into practice immediately, and then you can go back into the classroom and say, this now I've been in the workplace for a short period of time. This is now what I need to take out of the academic learning that I now go on to have to make me even more effective. Yeah. So I think that's right. Yeah. The other Smith, point.
Can I interrupt you before you make the next point? I just wanted to speak to that point that you make about getting that student into the workplace and then getting that student back into the classroom. Is there an opportunity to, after that student has left the classroom for the last time and going into the work environment, to get them back now as a worker and still learn from them? Because I think there's a different mindset between when you come back as a student and sit again and continue your education to when you come back as a worker who now has got these skills, these experiences to share with those who are coming up the ladder.
Right. So you've made a very important point there, because that's something that if we'd have been talking about this 4 or 5 years ago, I would have kind of had a relatively vague answer. But it's something that we've realized is really important, in that you've got a big resource there and a very willing resource to pass on their experience to the next cohort. So we much more systematically connect people who have recently left the university back to people who are in their degrees. And a point, extending that point a little bit, one of the things we haven't talked about, we've made a kind of assumption here, which is a valid assumption to a certain extent, which is we're talking about people going from the university into relatively well-established large-scale companies. Yeah. Quite a number of students these days are going to be self-employed, and they're going to start their own company. So it's a completely different mindset. And therefore being able to, and this is where we've practiced it here much more rigorously, is for those student entrepreneurs, being able to get the experience of someone who's 3 to 5 years ahead of them and knows what the issues are is actually the most valuable learning that they can have. So making that connection and making entrepreneurship more embedded in the curriculum, and perhaps more importantly, you can't force it down everyone's throat, because not everyone's naturally inclined that way, and nor should you. But giving people the opportunity, more people are entrepreneurial than they realize. They just need the opportunity. And therefore, what we've been doing is both in curriculum and outside the curriculum, giving students many more opportunities to support, to be able to develop their own thinking, and connecting them to the alumni of the university, particularly the recent alumni who have gone down that route, is really important. And that's a whole skills development program, in inverted commas, in its own right.
Yeah, absolutely. So Gendry, do we solve the problem with those suggestions from the professors?
It's definitely going to be a collaboration between academic and business. Yeah. So we have to work together, and I think we can solve the problem. So one of the things we need, certain professions have to have internship. Like even if you go to study medicine, you have to do your internship. If you study to become a chartered accountant, you've got to do your articles. Yeah. We need to have all degrees attracting some sort of internship. Yeah. So that actually helps to get that practical experience, because we don't do that. Yeah. And I think we must also talk to the professors about how do we have this continuous professional development, and how do we bring people back to the classroom for that CPD? Because if you got your degree 30 years ago, you're no longer relevant, or even if you got your degree 5 years ago, your degree is not relevant, because that's how fast the world is changing.
Yeah.
And how do we actually, do we put an expiry on degrees?
Yeah.
Do we, force people back into the classroom to be relevant?
Re-educate them.
But we have to re-educate, and that's
As long as they're not gulags, right?
Exactly. But even we don't have curriculums in our university that
Yeah.
actually assist in the CPD as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's expand the conversation. Azmat, essentially trying to understand the continuing disconnect we see between the young person who learns at the working environment and the requirements of the business where they are lending, and that disconnect.
Within the African context, let's start with that. Even within the African context, within the 50-odd countries, there are wide differences. I believe that if we were to look at what education means to people, we need to, if the discussion is, how do we make young people, or for that matter, people of any age, more able to be part of the economy, more able to be part of the as an earning member of society, then that's one conversation, and we can have that conversation. But there is another aspect to this, and that is, how do we educate young people, people of all ages, and contribute to their education, given that there are a lot of changes that have taken place in society and are accelerating changes taking place in society. And education, for me, is not just about economic empowerment, it's an important part of that. It's about more wholesome aspect of living life. And as my concern is that, with all the emphasis, and without any doubt, the emphasis is important, but with all the emphasis on education as a means to economic livelihood, we might be missing some aspects of education that are perhaps equally important. And let me give you an example, which I believe is relevant to Africa, but is certainly observable, or was observable, during let's say the 2000s, when we had the global financial crisis. And we had thousands of people, young people, with educational qualifications, highly qualified physics PhDs and mathematics, etc., going en masse into things like private equity, into hedge funds, into quant, and part of that led it to what I believe was the disconnect between the technical education and the more wholesome understanding of what societies should be. And when we focus only on one aspect of it, we tend to encourage people to not think about the other important aspects, such as, what should society look like? What are the moralities? What are the ethics? What are the values that we bring to the table when we are well-educated individuals?
Sure.
So I just wanted to make that point here, but I don't want to take the conversation away completely from, I believe, where you want to go, which is to talk about the economic aspects of education. So I'll leave it at that now, and we can come back to this discussion.
Yeah, but let me get your thoughts as well on how you see education fitting into the requirements of business, which is the particular focus of this panel. I want your thoughts in terms of that disconnect, or if it's not a disconnect for you, how you view it and how we bridge the gap.
Yes, of course, we are trying to catch up. There are many things happening that within the industrial context, within the business context, and education is, or people that are part of the education establishment are trying to catch up, whether they are technical schools, whether they are business schools, whether they are scientific environments, they are trying to catch up. At the same time, I think the universities, and again, depends on which part of the world you're talking about, the universities are ahead in some respects. And look at what's happened we talked about the AI so-called revolution. The universities are being hollowed out with regard to the experts who are supposed to lead the research on AI, and they're going to and understandably, the institutions like the AI and Google and others.
Yeah.
And so I think the disconnect is on both sides. And part of the problem, as I see it, is that in the African context, there is how is education being funded? Where is the money coming from, and how is that money being employed? So, in Western world, there is a wide range of capital that gets employed within education. It comes from industry, it comes from business leaders, it comes from people who are endowing money to education institutions, and it comes from public money as well. In the African context, perhaps you know better than I do, where is that money coming? Because money drives the objectives of the educational establishments to some extent. If it's public money, it allows for a decision on what is being educated, who's being educated, and how they're being educated in a certain way. If it is private money, if I am Philip Morris in the 1970s or 80s, I drive the way in which I believe education should move.
Yeah.
So that, I believe, is part of the equation here, where in the African context, we need to understand why we are not educating, and I believe there is a disconnect, but why we are not educating young people towards a more sort of productive economic environment.
Yeah.
So yes, there is a disconnect. The
Yeah.
question is, what is that disconnect? And the disconnect is obviously on the technical side.
Yeah.
The disconnect is also on a more, beyond the technical side.
Sure.
And the question is, how do we bridge the gap?
Got you. Thanks for that, Azmat. Professor Smith, if I can come to you, I'd like you to respond, if you can, please. I think in particular to the point that he's making around the source of funding and perhaps its impact on the kind of student that we are getting out of the university.
Well, that's a very complicated question, because it comes back. I mean, it comes back to the question about what the point of education is, and the reason I say that is that it then depends on who funds it, and often people don't think it's a very profound question in a way that's being asked, because the point is that both there is public and private benefit in higher education.
Yeah.
And also, of course, higher education is an individual choice. It's not like it's compulsory education, which therefore the balance between the public and the private good changes. And of course, all different countries have come up with different solutions as to that mix, as to who funds it. In the end, of course, the point Azmat was making is entirely right, that the funder believes they've got a right to a certain extent to say what the education should include. And I think that's why you need to think very carefully about the mix. But I think a key point in looking at funding is also thinking about one thing we haven't touched on. We've quite rightly been focused on students, but universities, of course, are also there to generate ideas. They're there to generate research as well.
Yeah.
And that research can be done carefully in collaboration with industry. And you want a mixture, really. You want a mixture between that which is what would be called, I don't quite like this term, blue skies, fundamental, and that which is much more applied, much more directed at solving a problem. And we've seen, particularly in the UK, and I'm sure this happens in other countries as well, but of course I understand the UK context, is we've seen research funding, much more of it done directly in collaboration, so co-creation of partially funded, publicly funded research projects with industry. And there's some very good examples of that. And then, and this is where it touches back to students, because also I suspect we've been focusing on undergraduate students in this conversation.
Yeah.
But of course you've got masters, and of course you've got PhDs. And one of the key points, that one of the statistics that stands out in my mind is that the higher the degree that you hold, the better your life chances in all aspects, your health, your wealth, and that of the society around you. I think that all levels of a degree are important in this conversation, and we mustn't just, although it's clearly the major form of higher education, undergraduate degrees, all those other degrees are important as well.
Yeah, a very important point you make, and I'm glad you answered the issue around public as well as private funding and collaborations that you have seen from a UK perspective, given you have had a longer history in terms of education. Professor Martin, I wanted to come to you. Please weigh in on Azmat's contribution, but I also wanted to say to you, does it really matter whether the money is public or private? Because, I mean, as an employer, all I'm looking for is a worker that's work ready.
Yeah, look, I think the end product is the same, if you like. I don't know that it directly impacts what happens in the workplace. In Australia, there's very much, more demands from students now who are paying a larger percentage of their student fees. So they then expect more, and they believe they have the right to demand more and say what should be included in courses and what shouldn't as well, because they are genuinely, customers. Excuse me. However, I do want to throw in another piece of this jigsaw puzzle in terms of the links between universities and business. And there's a bit of a move in Australia to hire academics who have not been, solely academics, but have had industry experience as a way of actually linking the two together. So we haven't talked about that yet. And, you know, when I went to uni, I was taught, for example, by people who had never stepped foot into a business, who had been a career-long academic.
Sure.
And so some people are rethinking what academics should bring to the table.
Sure. Okay. Do you want to drink some water, Prof? I'm very happy for you to take your sip of water and then come back to you and you continue your thought, because it's an interesting one. You're right. We haven't explored that one, and I'd really love to hear others' thoughts around it. And I'm coming to you, Godfrey, because in part I think I answered a question on your behalf about what kind of an employer you want. Professor Smith, tell me if you can pick up that conversation where you complete your thought around hiring academics into the work environment, or what kind of lessons that you hope you can pick up from there, and what you see in terms of the experience that you have there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very similar trend in the UK. We're seeing to what Gary's described, in the sense that we have now a classification within our academic roles of what we call professors of practice. Yeah. And professors of practice means they're senior within their world of work, and they bring a lot of experience, and they may be direct employees, or they may be people who just come in for lectures. Yeah. They'll be and there's certainly an increase in the number who are fractional contracts, who want to bring their expertise into the academic environment, but at the same time they want to keep their links with industry, and that's a very good bridge between the two. So it answers some of the questions that we were discussing earlier on in this. And it's not, there's lots of them, but it's much more common now than it was even 5 years ago. And I think it is a very good way. I mean, it will be very different between different disciplines. Yeah. So, for example, business schools, economics, accountancy, they are all degrees where I see a lot of this happening. In some of your core arts and science disciplines, physics, English, it's going to be less common. Sure. But engineering is another area, computer science. And one of the points I think Azmat made, I wanted to pick up on, if I may, is that he used the word hollowing out. I wouldn't quite go that far, but it is a trend we're noticing, that it's much more difficult to hire people in some disciplines, computer science. AI is particularly difficult because they get great opportunities within industry, and they get great opportunities in industry to do blue skies thinking. And therefore, it's a challenge. So I do recognize some of those characteristics.
Absolutely. I think we've given Professor Martin enough time to drink some water. Professor Martin?
Yes, look, increasingly, as I said, the question is being asked, should academics have more than academic qualifications and teaching experience to be able to deliver in classrooms? And I know that that's probably not popular with many academics who are career academics and have never stepped foot as such out of a university, but I think it is something that's increasingly important, and we don't hear very much about exchange programs between business and industry as well. We could see a little bit more about academics going back into the workplace as well. Again, probably not really popular with some academics, but I think these things are all part of the jigsaw puzzle. It doesn't have to be that all academics are doing these things, some, and it just gives you that blend of experience. The other thing that I have to say that I've been dying to say that I've been holding back here is that we talk about the universities as being the medium through which you prepare people for the workplace. And in Australia, I saw an interesting argument here. We've been pushing people through universities, trying to build numbers in universities. They're growing. We've got record numbers of students here. And now someone's come back and said, are these people that we've pushed through university and we encouraged really, was that the right pathway for it? It's like university is, everyone has to do it. But in fact, there are some very high performing people in workplaces who have never stepped foot in a university.
Yes.
So we have to rethink whether we should just keep pushing people into universities and making it this sort of must-have experience where other jobs may not need these qualifications.
Yeah. Interesting take. Sugendra, I made you listen to a lot of stuff. So I'll allow you to pick and choose what you want to respond to.
So I think I wanted to respond to the last professor.
Okay.
The idea about academics going into business, and not all academics will do that. That is brilliant.
Getting into business to work, but
To work.
not into business to form a business. I wanted to make that distinction.
Yes,
Yeah.
to work.
To work.
To work. And the reason that'll be great is because when they go back to develop the curriculum, they actually have realism with them, because at the moment we find it's too theoretical. We have people that come with masters in mathematics, and when you put them in the quants division, to actually do the modeling and stuff, they don't know how to do it. What is required. They don't understand these things. But the curriculum becomes practical.
Sure.
And that is what business is struggling with, is when these graduates come out, we just put them in a corner because nobody has time to train them, because they said they should have been trained at universities. So we actually, as you said, we want people ready to work. And how do we make that relevant? So I think that will be brilliant. And you just need one or two to actually help to redefine the curriculum with realism.
One of the points you made, and we haven't picked it up on it here, Azmat, I'm going to come to you and give you an opportunity to respond as well to some of the points that have been made by the others, is around the type of the kind of teaching that we have. I think these learned fellows call it pedagogy. That you are suggesting that needs to change, because you're saying it's producing a mindset that tries to simply regurgitate stuff. You have spoken about what you are saying is a shortage of critical thinkers that are coming from the universities. Please expand on that thought, and then we get the learned people to respond.
Okay, thank you. So what we are saying is that people are just spewing out information they learned, but they're not able to unpack what does that mean, and how do they take that information to make it to become innovative, to actually think and solve these problems. Because every business today is facing major problems on how we take the business forward. But people come out with these degrees and qualifications, whether it's masters or whatever it is, but they don't know how to solve problems. And that's what is missing. Design thinking, basic things like that is not embedded in the foundations of degrees. But I think the problem doesn't just start, and I'd like to hear from the professors how they feel about students coming in as well, because the problem does not start at universities. The problem actually starts at schools. You know, I think the curriculums at schools actually need to be changed as well to become relevant, that when students actually get to universities, you know, you're thinking at a different level, a higher level, and you're bringing out these individuals that's actually going to make a change in the world, as opposed to only one or two people, you know, like we got the Elon Musk or, you know, the Bill Gates that has done things, or the Michael Dells. But you don't have this coming out all over, all continents and everywhere. And how do we start to change those things?
Yeah, it's interesting because Professor Martin's other point that he made towards the end was that it's not everybody who needs to be going through university, but we can explore that another time on another session. We don't have the time now here. Asmat, I wanted to come to you and ask you to respond to whatever points you may want from the others. But I think one point that I may want you to respond to is around the suggestion that we don't need to get everybody through that university door. We can get many productive and useful people from other institutions without necessarily going the university route.
I totally agree. So let me just expand that a little bit. Gary, I think you made a great point. And you know, there has been a lot of thought that has been expressed about the structure of education today, as opposed to what the structure of education today should be, ought to be, given where we are as a society, whether in Africa or globally, and how education was structured, say 100 years ago, or let's say 80 years ago, post-industrial revolution. And yes, a lot has changed, and unfortunately, much of the basic structure of education, the 12 years of primary or schooling, and then 4 + 4, etc., is not necessarily as relevant today as it was a few decades ago. So yes, I think the structure of education, where education is conveyed in the classroom, in a training school, in a skills development area, within business itself, in face-to-face, digitally. So given the extensive changes that have taken place technologically and in society and the way we do and convey things, yes, I totally agree with Gary's point that it's not necessary to have everybody go through university, etc. And there are many ways of achieving that goal. Second, there was a discussion about the link between the education institutions and business. I have to say that the point that was made by, I think, forgive me if I pronounce the name wrong, Sugeri, about that not everybody not all academics need to go into business, is absolutely correct. There are certain disciplines of academia that really need to benefit from a total focus on blue sky thinking. But having said that, a lot of academics do live in ivory towers and believe that business is something bad. I'm sorry, I mean, I'm sure you won't disagree. And the trend that Mark mentioned of people, practitioners going and participating in the academic environment, I think is a great evolution. There's a great change, and I think there should be much more of that, and more broadly. And I don't know how much of that is happening in African context. I know it's happening in UK. I know it's happening to some extent in the US. I'm not sure how much of it's happening in Europe or other places. But it's a great trend, and I think people with the kind of experience that they've had in 20 years of business environment will benefit a lot from going and checking that out in the academic environment, and vice versa, in the sense of them being able to convey and participate in the improvement of the curriculum, improvement of education, and improvement of how and what is being taught.
Yep, absolutely. I wanted to give them a chance to quickly respond. We're running out of time. Professor Smith, can I begin with you? Then we go to Professor Martin. Into that, I'm going to add a little kicker, but let me add my kicker after you guys have answered. Professor Smith?
Yeah, no, so I think what we're hearing here is the evolution of a whole range of things, the way curriculum has developed, the partnership with industry, getting people from industry into academia and vice versa. I think all of those things are important. The other thing we've sort of touched on is the nature of careers that people will have when they leave university. The model when I left university, and I won't say how many years ago it was that you'd get a job and that would be your job, basically. That's very unlikely to be the main mode of most of the students we have graduating today. And therefore making sure they stay in contact, and universities provide continuing professional development as part of their broader offer, is something I think you'll see evolve more in universities. And particularly one of the things we learned through, some people are very good at online already, but some of the things we learned through COVID was being able to deliver bite-sized things online to a wider audience and all of that type of thing. So for example, when we hold our open lectures now, we get much bigger audiences. These are public lectures, much bigger audiences, because we broadcast them online as well as having them in person. So really being able to bring technology, think about the way we break up curricula, continuing professional development, I think are all things that are going to be interesting challenges for higher education in the next few years.
Yeah. Professor Martin?
That was a great summary already, but what I would add to the mix is, in the Australian context, I don't see university graduates going into workplaces now simply regurgitating facts and being able to unpack it. I'm actually seeing a massive transformation in that, where I see students graduate, go into workplaces, and definitely apply critical thinking skills, definitely collaborate with their peers and others in the workplace, definitely show levels of emotional intelligence, and definitely contribute that digital savviness that a lot of workplaces demand. I'm actually seeing, quite a transformation here in Australia about graduates, and I think it comes down to how we're taught. It's not just what's taught, but it's how it's taught through project work, collaboration or collaborative type learning in amongst students when they are on campus. That has to translate into the workplace, and I think universities are starting to really pick up on that and make a huge difference.
Part of the concern is that AI threatens the way we have been taught. Does it threaten education and producing the type of worker that we're talking about here? Because I did a little experiment with the kids in the newsroom, and they quickly got my CV in a couple of seconds versus what would have traditionally done. And to Sugendra's point, if I'm getting someone who's going to use a machine to be able to do something for me, is that person going to be the critical thinker that I'd like in the business? I'm going to put it to you, Professor Martin, and ask you to also wrap up your thoughts around what we're trying to answer to here, the relevance and the connection between education and our very fast-changing work environment.
Yeah, so some people make careers in terms of writing CVs and developing it. Clearly, that job is going to just and new jobs are going to emerge. I mean, we're going to have a space travel agent in the future, aren't we? When we travel to space, that's a new job. It wasn't there. It's made possible through artificial intelligence and technology more broadly. But I actually think, in summing up, I would say that in terms of the industry, academia, the links between that, there's a number of bits to that jigsaw puzzle. I think we've covered some of those today in detail. It's not a one-size-fits-all strategy. There are multiple strategies to bring industry and academia closer together. And I don't think we should underestimate just how much progress has been made so far. Sometimes we forget about that, and we're quick to turn around and say, universities need to do this, and universities need to do that, and they're lacking in this. But there's been an enormous transformation in Australian universities, as far as I can see, about how those links have come, or how those two have come together and produced some outstanding results.
Absolutely. Azmat?
A couple of points. Just wrap up my thoughts on this. And this is such a fascinating conversation. We can go on for hours on this.
Sure.
But 3 points I'd like to make. Number one, the point about the structure of education and linked to continuing education. Education is not. Firstly, of course, we need to have employable people because we need employable people to employ. But that process is not just a 12 plus 4 structure anymore. It's continuing through life, because, as I think one of my colleagues here mentioned, as a practical matter, everything is changing with regard to how what kind of jobs we'll be in, whether we'll be in one job for the rest of our life. I think academia is somewhat privileged, and perhaps that's why they want to ring fence it, in the sense that, they go into education and they stay in education for the rest of their life. But things are changing, and there's an evolution, and therefore education needs to evolve, and it should be a continuing process. So that's the first point I'd like to emphasize.
Yeah.
The second is, with all the emphasis and the right emphasis on the employability of people, and I think Sugene mentioned that what we need to produce in part and substantively perhaps is people who are going to be employed and employable. But again, I would like to emphasize one point that I made, I think, at the beginning of part of the discussion, which is, yes, technical education, very important, employability, extremely important, but education and being useful members of society goes beyond just only the technical aspects. We need to bring in and perhaps re-emphasize the education, and that should happen at an early stage, not in the universities alone. But what is the purpose of my education? What contributions do I make as a responsible citizen? What is if I am a super expert on AI, do I have a responsibility for understanding and of the ethics of my profession? If I am a quant, and if I am using my quant to destroy financial systems, knowingly or unknowingly, do I have a responsibility to think about what the implications of that might be? And is there a moral obligation that I need to think about? And those kinds of basic aspects of education need to be front-ended as people become mature. Finally,
quickly,
I would just like to say that because the importance of this topic is so great, especially across the world, and I think Australia and in Europe and in some parts of Asia, certainly China and India and in the US, a lot has changed. Within the African context, I think there's room for learning from different experiences from different parts of the world, and perhaps CNBC, you can think about creating a panel of people such as the professors here and others in industry who can think about this and make a contribution to what African education in Africa should be like in the next over the next 15-20 years, and perhaps that panel comprising of people from different parts of society and different parts of the world, someone with the ability to bring that panel together within the African context, but taking into account all the changes that have taken place across the world and across the decades, and for the future, might be something that you could consider.
I like it, Azmat. Thanks very much. Professor Smith?
Yeah, so 3 brief points to finish on. On the AI one, perhaps I'm the only person that's not claiming to be an expert then in the world. But I think the key point is it will change things. But when a new thing comes in, it's always overhyped. Going back to 2000, the millennium bug was going to stop all computers across all of the world operating. And look what happened. So I think, it is a revolution. There'll be new jobs. Things will be replaced, society will adapt, it will move on. So I think that's the first point. The second point is I agree very strongly with one of the points that Azmat just made, which is there's the technical things that you learn at university, how you do things, what the facts are that allow you to understand a subject. But then there's the broad, what education is all about, and particularly at university, it's the broader context in which you make those decisions. You know, the difference in the ethics of it, the morals of it. You know, you can make a decision, but do you understand what the broader implications of that are?
Yeah.
And that's really a good education means people question themselves all of the time about that context. And I think that's really important. And the final point is, and Gary made this, I think, very well, I want to repeat it, is we shouldn't be too hard on ourselves, in the sense that if you look where we were 10 years ago, the interactions with business, and then 10 years before that, there's a lot of progress been made. Now, that isn't sitting here being complacent. We need to work harder at it. But there's a lot of activity. If I think how much entrepreneurship is embedded in the curriculum and the opportunities students get today, they definitely didn't have them 10 years ago. And therefore, I think we just have to continue that evolution. But really enjoyed the conversation and been really stimulating.
Thank you, Professor Smith. So, Godfrey, you have the final say.
Okay, thank you. So I agree with the professors that at the end of the day, there's been a lot of progress in education. However, I think we need to be realistic and keep up with the pace that the world is changing at. So I think that's an important part. Academia needs to be more agile. The second thing is we need to be relevant. So as much as we are learning the theory and we're learning principles and learning how to think, we actually need to bring the practical aspects to it as well. And therefore, some sort of internship or VAC work or collaboration between industry and academia, how do you get these students into the workplace is very important. We need to continue that. And thirdly, with the changing environment and AI and what's happening there, we can't dismiss it. We need to actually say, how do we make sure that this is the future? And what courses do we actually cut off? So the professions are no longer relevant. And don't put our students through those professions because they're not employable at the end of the day. So I think even the universities need to relook at what curriculums and courses that they do offer as well.
Absolutely. We can't ignore it. You're absolutely right. I know a few people who have bet thousands of dollars on NVIDIA in the last 2 weeks alone, with that share price going crazy. And so we need to make sure we continue to be relevant. Sugandra, thank you. My final takeaway is just, I'm actually excited by it. The idea and the possibility of taking a professor and bringing him into my newsroom, and then imagine mining all that knowledge together with the practical experience of what you will see in our newsroom, I think could transform us. But that's where we leave it today. Thank you to my panelists. It's been a great panel. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to the future of education on the African continent that we can shape and change in the manner that we like.